here it is. What a gem. Just your standard John Deere B. Although it does have this interesting hydraulic pump setup. Motor's locked up though. They said they put diesel in it, which there is diesel in there right now. Radiator's holding water, so that's pretty good. The grills aren't too bad. Got this cylinder on it. The clutch moves, which is good. Needs to be adjusted, but and then the main attraction, 3-point hitch. It's all there. All the brackets. The pins are a little bit seized, but it's not a big deal. Serial number 285903. It's got a Wico X. It has the carburetor. Not sure what model it is. Alright, so this John Deere B, I call it the Clinton John Deere B because I picked it up in Clinton, Connecticut, and I have to differentiate it between the 3 other Bs that we've got. So this one, we drug it on the trailer, got it home, stripped a lot of stuff off it. It had a part of a loader frame on it. It had a 3-point hitch on it. The 3-point hitch was actually the reason I bought this tractor. That 3-point hitch is in really good shape. I think those are worth something. So, engine was seized. Took the head off it real quick so that we could clean out the cylinders, and we got it freed up. And then it was just sitting for a while, and we went to move it somewhere closer to the garage to work on it, and somehow it got stuck in gear. So over the summer, I took the cover off the top of the transmission off to try and pry at the shift forks, and stuff's been rusted up in there. So the plan with this tractor is I want to make sure all the stuff in the transmission's working, trying to inspect it and make sure I don't have to tear the tractor down much more than it already is, because then I'm just going to put it back together pretty much the way it sits. My dad had wire brushed a lot of this, a lot of the loose paint off here, and we just put clear coat over it. I think it looks pretty good in this condition here. So diving right in here, the first thing I did is get the transmission cover out of the way, and then, like I said, it was acting like it was stuck in gear, so I was messing around in there with some pry bars and figured out all of the shift forks were seized to the shafts, and then I heated those, tried working them back and forth, wasn't really getting anywhere, and I pretty quickly decided I had to tear into that transmission. So here, getting the flywheel off. These aren't too bad to get off. I kind of got lucky with this one. It wasn't really rusted to the crankshaft. Just pop that nut off and then pull it off. They put this locking nut on the crankshaft here to prevent the flywheel from sliding back and forth on the crankshaft. But I'm gonna put a couple punch marks in here to make sure I get this on. I'm pretty sure this flywheel will only go on one way, but I'm still gonna put a punch mark just to be safe. All right, I didn't even have to put much pressure on it. So I can just spin this by hand. Yeah, it's pulling right off there. Look at that. Look at that. John Deere B flywheel versus a little baby Farmall H flywheel. Oh, looks like our starter's struggling there too. Jeez, this is why you don't leave stuff sitting out.
for months. Leaving anything outside just kills it. At least put it under a shed. Even if you have tarps covering it, like we had tarps covering this tractor the whole time, and they still just...
Anyway, moving right along here. I'm popping off the overdrive cover, so I believe this is for 4th and 6th gear. So that gear pops right off the countershaft, and then this is the first shift fork you have to take off. And I struggled getting that cast piece that engages with the shift lever to come off the shaft there, but a little bit of heating and beating and penetrating oil got it to come off. And then we can move on to the next shift forks. Alright, I decided I gotta pull all of these shift forks out. So I made a video going through one of these transmissions a couple of years ago. But these shift forks, they have these kind of nuts on the ends that you can thread in and out. And then they have a bolt that locks the shift fork to them. And that way you can get the gears aligned properly so that the detents are in the right spots. So there's one of them pulled out there. And then you can thread in another bolt to the end of the shift fork and use that to pull the fork out. So here's one of the shift forks. And be careful not to lose the little detents. There's one of them. Luckily these are so rusted they don't even want to fall down. Keep these together, you don't want to get the parts mixed up.
Yeah, you can see the rust starting on there. I mean, it's not bad, but those gears do not want to move. I'll get that stuff all cleaned up as good as I can, see if we can get stuff sliding. What I'm worried about is those gears on the bottom. This is the sliding gear shaft. And then that driven shaft down there, I guess you can call it the countershaft, and that's what drives the differential bolt gear here. So anyway, this gear, this bottom gear for the range selector is supposed to have a bearing inside it, and it's supposed to spin freely on the countershaft down there. I believe the other gears on the countershaft are supposed to be locked on the shaft. So if this range gear is locked on the shaft, then it's going to make it seem like it's always in gear, because that range gear is going to be able to drive this one, which is going to want to spin the first reduction, and the clutch, and the engine. With the heat there, that should suck that penetrating oil up into the bearing. Alright, I've determined that I gotta get that countershaft out of there. That bearing's gonna be full of rust, so it at least has to get taken apart and cleaned up. If not, put a new bearing in there. So to get that countershaft out, first reduction cover has to come off. To do that, clutch has to come off. To do that, tire has to go out, because obviously there's not enough space there. So this doesn't look too rusted, but we'll see how it goes.
This is always one of the big debacles that any John Deere 2-cylinder tractor has to deal with, sliding these wheel centers out on the axles. And the best way I found to do it is you just take that clamp and get some pieces of threaded rod, and you just take a bunch of time and crank down on the threaded rod as even as you can, and it slides right out. We have had them get really rusty before. Like the centers will be really rusted on the axles, and then you just put a bottle jack in between the clamp and the axle.
All right, that was a lot of cranking. Should have the center all the way to the end of the axle. There should be just enough space to pull the clutch off there. So these castle nuts aren't supposed to be tight. That's why it has the cotter pin, and that's also how you adjust how much force it takes to engage and disengage the clutch. So you got the outside plate, and you should have a friction in there, and then a steel, and then this other friction with two sides. And then that's the driven disc in there, so we need you get a puller on there and pull that off. So here I'm pulling the clutch yoke off the front of the first reduction housing. You don't have to do that before you take the driven disc out of the clutch, but I did. There's the puller setup. I actually built this puller a few years ago when I had to take the clutch off the other John Deere B. It's just bar stock that I got from McMaster-Carr. It's important to have a fine thread bolt for your pusher bolt. You can get a lot more force with that than a coarse thread. I have washers underneath the pusher bolt to protect the threads on the end of the crankshaft. And there it goes. Easy as that. And there's marks on here already. From the factory, they marked these because these are balanced to the crankshaft. I put an extra mark just to make sure, but that should be it. So you can see how the clutch works. This gear goes to the first reduction. Crankshaft is able to spin freely on the inside of it. And this moves back and forth to engage and disengage it. So now I'm cutting all the safety wire for those bolts for that little sheet metal shield. And then you can start pulling bolts off of the first reduction cover and the nut off the end of that transmission input shaft. And then it should come right off if you take all the bolts out. And you gotta pull the gear off at the same time. So that is a little difficult, but you also have to put the gear back on at the same time. See how I got that gear? Nothing wrong with the radio. Take note of which way this gear goes on. You know, you gotta put this side this way. Also, you know, the beveled side, that other gear engages on this side. Front porch. There it is. And then
this whole shaft, well, this whole shaft should slide out and the gears just slide off the end and you pull the gears out here. So, all right, here's that bearing on the end. So you get a new departure number. If you look at my other video I made about rebuilding another one of these transmissions, a different John Deere B, I have all the numbers in that video, but obviously, I just destroyed this bearing. I don't remember how I took this apart last time, but we are going to need a new bearing. They all... So there's the sliding gear shaft. So you can see how the range gears work, how it engages with the input shaft, you know, and then the first reduction gear sits on there. Kind of an interesting design that they came up with. And the countershaft comes out this side. It's 2 tapered roller bearings, whereas the sliding gear shaft has these straight roller bearings. So this one comes out this side. This side you've got this nut, and then use a punch to unthread that, and then that shaft should slide out that way. Alright, there's our problem. Look at how rusted this is. So even if we got this to spin, I mean, that bearing's shot. So that's what we get for leaving this. I mean, this could have been rusted before we even got it, but leaving it for a year under a tarp didn't help. This is what killed it. I took the brakes off and put these wooden covers, but this section where the gears are here, they're supposed to be locked on the shaft because those splines, like I said, this one is supposed to be able to spin. So I know for a fact you can still get these because I bought one of these for the other B. That was the issue I was having. And that is quite rusty in there. And there's a few spacers in here. So if you're doing this and you don't have the manual, I don't know what you're doing. You should buy the manual, because you kind of need the manual to know where all these go back together. And then this bearing. This one doesn't look horrible, actually. Right there, you can see pitting. All right, it's the next morning, and here's kind of my list of bearings, and here's the bearings that I ended up having in stock. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 2 tapered roller bearings that go on the counter shaft, and then this bearing goes in the first reduction housing, and this bearing goes on the end of the sliding gear shaft. And then we're going to need one of these, which I don't think has a part number on it. But that shouldn't be too big of a deal. I should be able to cross-reference the John Deere number. While we wait for parts though, I'm going to start putting the brakes back together. So you can see I'm going to put new lining on these shoes. This is what happens to that old lining. It gets rust underneath it, and then they start to crack and they'll just break right off. Just drill the ends of those rivets off, take a punch, and they should tap right out. Alright,
I just put some weld-through primer on these shoes for in between the lining and the shoes. All right, I got 2 of the linings on. Just kind of experimenting how to do the rivets because I forgot from the last time I did these. I got this tool from Steiner. The tooling that comes with the tool doesn't exactly work right with these brass rivets, but here's what the linings look like. You can get ones that are flexible that you have to bend into shape, and you can also get pre-bent ones. Simple to do this. Just get a lining. They go either direction, and then I take this bit that's supposed to kind of mushroom the rivet over, but it kind of just collapses it. I hit it twice to collapse it a little bit, and then I take one of these. This is a centering punch. I just got one that fits good through here, and then drive it the rest of the way home, and you get a pretty good looking rivet there. It's definitely tempting to just buy brand new shoes with the linings already installed, and that rivet tool, I think it's about $100 now, but by the time you do, 2 or 3 sets of these linings, that rivet tool is more than paid for itself. The pre-lined brake shoes are quite expensive. All right, I just got this brake mostly put back together. These are pretty simple, but let's put the shaft and the drum back on. You gotta be careful. These tend to want to explode off here. So take note when you disassemble these, there's usually shims. And then here's your drum. Seems to not spin. Now it spins. You get a washer for that. Run it home. Make sure it spins. It does not. What's going on? I'm going to take one of these out. Alright, I took one shim out, and now I have this nut tight, and it spins as it should. So I'm still waiting for parts for the transmission, so while I'm waiting, decided to take a deeper look into the engine. Just want to pop the pistons out here since the head's already off and there's easy access, and just check, make sure the cylinders are in good shape, the pistons are in good shape. I ended up replacing the rings because I broke some of the old ones trying to remove them from the piston. You can see I got a rag stuck in the crankcase there at some point when this tractor was sitting. But I just beat on the back of the pistons with a board, so to not damage them, and they can come out pretty hard sometimes. See, those rings wouldn't have sealed. It wouldn't have run like this. Look at all that. Okay, most of this engine rebuild is a time-lapse, so you get to listen to me ramble on here. So the first thing I did is honed the cylinders out, and they cleaned up decently well. Still a little bit of pitting in there, but this tractor, I'm not bringing that block to the machine shop. It'll be fine. So the next thing I did is clean the head gasket surface off, and then I got a set of
oversized rings, a used set of oversized rings, which were already a little bit worn out, to pair with the worn out standard bore cylinders. So I measured all the rings and used a file like this to file the ends down just a little bit to get the proper clearance in the rings. So when the engine heats up and the rings expand, it'll actually take up that clearance. And if there's not enough clearance on the ends of the rings, you could seize the motor. So then keep track of those brass shims that go on the rod cap, because that's actually how you set your oil clearance. These tractors, a lot of them used Babbitt bearings, so they pour Babbitt as a bearing surface rather than using bearing inserts like you'd see on a more modern engine. Some of the later John Deere Bs did have insert style bearings. So I put the piston ring compressor, but you'll notice I can't fit the ring compressor on all 5 of the rings at once, so that bottom oil control ring, you just have to jimmy around there and get it in by hand, which can be a little bit of a struggle, but it is possible. So then I just repeat the process with the other piston. Get the rings installed, put a little oil on them, set the ring spacings, put the compressor on, jimmy around with that oil control ring till it taps right in, then torque the rod caps.
Okay, it's a couple days later. I got new used bearings. There's the 2 spacers, and then I also got this washer because I broke the old one. So I got these from John over at Rusty Acres Ranch. I think they're out in California, but they have a lot of 2-cylinder parts. It's vintagetractors.com is the website. Pretty rudimentary website, but you email him, ask him what you need, and he's pretty good to work with. I got this shaft cleaned up best I could. So these stuff goes on here. This small spacer, 1 bearing, big spacer, other bearing, this washer deal, and then this bearing gets pressed on the end. So you're going to want to have your press that you got for free outside. Of course, why would you put it in your nice heated shop? Alright, now to install the gears. You're going to want the manual, and you're going to want to put it right next to where you're working. First, this gear. And this one. And this spacer with the tapered end facing that gear you just installed. And this one looks like it can go either direction. That's the one that engages with the full gear. I'm going to assume the end that's kind of tapered to accept the sliding gear that way. And then last is this spacer with the tapered end facing in. Now, we need to get the shims and this bearing plate, and I'll show you how to set the end play. So if I pry this back and forth, you can see we're at about 5.5 6/1000 on the end play. So I made 4 paper gaskets to go under that cap. I'm gonna take one of them out, and that should put us right at the 1 to 4 thousandths that the manual calls for. All right, I got the gaskets in there, and I used some Loctite 518. All right, we're right at 1,000. So I'm gonna call that good right there. So this input shaft bearing is one of the only bearings that I cannot find new. Can't get them on eBay. I don't know where to get them. So that bearing that goes on the end of the sliding gear shaft, it actually is shielded on one side, and the manual calls for packing it with grease. So I didn't just do that randomly, that's what the manual says to do. So since this sliding gear shaft uses a straight rollers on that input shaft bearing and ball bearing on the other side, you don't need to worry about the thickness of the shims under this bearing cap. All right, I got Loctite 518 on the first reduction cover. Now we could take the first reduction gear, put it in the housing there, and then we need to put this spacer. I forget how to do that. There's a couple dowel pins, so once you get it on the dowel pins, you just tap it in. And then you can just throw the bolts on. And since I use Loctite 518, it's an anaerobic sealer. You can tighten these bolts down immediately. I have had good luck with the Loctite 518 and not leaking on these covers. So the first reduction cover's on, as well as this little sheet metal shield that goes inside the clutch. Now we need to put the last gear on. It goes right here, and it is a press fit. So I have everything ready to go on this sliding gear shaft. Get the keyway set in there. So here's the setup for heating. Just have the gear set on this piece of exhaust pipe. I'm going to heat it with the torch, being careful to go nice and even. And then I have this thermometer. See, it's 53 degrees now. So we'll heat it probably about 400 or 450 degrees. We're at 420. Make sure you get the right side facing in. Boom. Just like that. So you probably don't have to go quite to 400. 350 would have probably worked. We'll just let it cool.
Make sure your cotter pin hole's lined up. Goes there, and it engages. Now the next step is installing the shift forks. So you'll notice those cotter pins on the tops of those shift forks. Those are going through the detent shafts, and if you push those detents in, there's a hole on those shafts. You can slide a cotter pin in, and it will keep the detents from engaging with the notches on the shift shafts, and it makes it easier to install them. So once I get all the shift forks installed, I adjust the shafts with those plugs on the end. I mentioned those earlier in the video, and you just want to make sure the gears are lined up with the center of whatever gear they're engaging with. And then get the 4th and 6th gear shaft installed with the shift fork that sits on the outside there. Then put a safety wire through the bolts that go on the ends of the shift fork shafts, and then we'll be good to put this cover on the end. I just use some silicone on that cover since it's sheet metal. An anaerobic sealant would not be the right choice for this cover. So you have to just loosely install those bolts, or install them hand tight and wait for that to cure, the silicone. Okay, I got that side cover on over there, as you saw. Put the shield that goes behind the clutch on. Now I can put the clutch on while I'm waiting for the silicone to dry over there. Assembly lube here. Actually, we want these splines to be dry. Bearing rides here where it's shiny. But then these splines is gonna be, that's where that disc, the driven disc, gets pressed on. And you don't want, anytime you have a tapered press fit, you want it to be dry and clean. Oil's gonna interfere with the taper, and it could cause it to loosen up over time. You'll see a lot on these tractors, the driven disc will actually loosen up and it'll wear those splines right out, and that disc will just start spinning on the shaft. So we got the first friction in there, then the driven disc. Remember, this driven disc has to get timed to the crankshaft, or it's balanced on the crankshaft. There's our marks lined up. Get that bolt and put a little Loctite on this guy. All right, all this stuff is in here. Now we just need to put on the yoke, and then we can adjust the clutch. So to slide these cast centers in, best way I found to do it is just rotate the wheel and hit it with a hammer. So hopefully you enjoy this 15 minutes of hammering. condensed down to just a few seconds. Then put a little anti-seize on there so nothing gets seized up in the future if this has to come apart again.
Alright, I got the brakes on this cover, as you saw. I adjusted the clutch. That's pretty easy. I start with the castle nuts flush and then go in one turn at a time so I can make sure all three are adjusted the same. And you just keep going until there's a good amount of pressure on the clutch lever. Don't want it to be too hard to disengage, but you want it to have a nice firm action. All the transmission stuff is pretty much buttoned up, so now it's time to button up the engine. So I got the head back from the machine shop. I ordered a new set of valves from Riley, but they're not here yet, and these valves were fine, so my plan was to use the new valves and then have them have them grind these, and then I'll just keep these as extras. But the new valves aren't here yet, and these ones look in good shape, and the machine shop already lapped them.
So then we can put all the valve springs on. I like to put a little assembly lube on the valve stems before I install them. Then just get your keepers in and the retainers, and this is pretty straightforward. There's not much really to describe here. If you don't have a valve spring compressor, you should get one of those if you're doing a project like this. It is possible to do this without a spring compressor though. I had done it before, but it's well worth the money.
And that's not gonna affect the sealing the compression. Manifold on first. Don't forget this washer deal that feeds oil to the rocker shaft. So these get torqued to 104 foot-pounds. I'm gonna start at 50 and then go to 80 and then 104. And that's it, the head's installed.
Now we can install the rocker shaft, little assembly lube on the push rods, get it bolted down there, tighten up the oil rail, and then we can set the valves. I just spin the motor. It's easy to find compression on each cylinder. Just hold your thumb over the spark plug hole. Once you get to compression stroke, set the valves. I forget what the clearance is. It's in the manual. Then put the valve cover on.
Alright, I got quite a few more things put on. You saw I got the battery tray, battery cables are on, flywheel cover and flywheel. Starter should work, I haven't tested it. I put on the spark plug wire, conduit, as well as a Wicco C magneto that I had laying around that I know is good. I rebuilt this a while ago. And it'll just be easier to get the tractor running with this because I don't have the mount for the coil. I do have a brand new aftermarket Delco style distributor. I also rebuilt the carburetor and have it bolted on, as well as a temporary fuel tank. There's no fuel in there yet though. Oh yeah, nice hot spark. These magnetos tend to have hotter spark than the 12 volt distributors. Okay, let's see if it starts. We have spark. Hopefully we have fuel. Hopefully we have compression. The only thing that could be wrong with our timing is if you get a 50-50 shot with these 2 cylinders, whether you get that distributor on there right, and if you get it wrong, you can just flip the spark plug wires. I think we may have got it wrong. We have oil pressure. It doesn't sound super good. It looks like we have exhaust and or an We also don't have any coolant in there, so it runs. Okay, I'm gonna fire it back up. I don't know if you heard me before, but I think the manifold is leaking there. So to test that, I'm gonna fire it back up and spray some starting fluid and see if the engine noise changes. But it does not seem like it's leaking there. It's hard to tell with these 2 cylinders with their kind of lumpy idle. Alright, it's back inside, and I fixed the leak on the carburetor. Just replaced that valve with a plug. I put a plug where the water temperature sender is supposed to go because I don't have one of those right now. Now I want to fill it with water. Alright, this is wonderful here. We have one leak right there, pretty obvious, and another leak right there. So, alright, so I've successfully made the hole about 20 times larger than it was. Okay, I'm not proud of that repair, but these old radiator cores, they just get so brittle. You have to move the fins out of the way to solder them and kind of crimp the tubes together. but when you try and, so someone had done that here, but when I was trying to do it up here, as soon as you touch anything, the tubes just start crumbling. Well, after 2 tries with JB Weld, I just slathered it up with Right Stuff. I need to put a new radiator on this. That core is no good, but it is holding water now with a very slow drip, but let's see if we can get this tractor to run for longer. Okay, got fuel in it again. See what happens. Pressure is right on low, but that's pretty normal when there's a oil. So this is the screw to adjust the oil pressure relief valve. Basically, you can tune up the pressure. So I just turned it up. Now we're sitting at just below high at idle. So that's much better. All right, the tractor's back inside, and I'm going to continue putting parts on it. Mainly the hood, because I want to hook up the gas tank and run it for longer. I just use up whatever half-empty bottles of oil I have laying around in these air cleaners.
Save that good one for up here.
Right, we got the hood and grill and the front emblem put on. It's still not done, but I still need to put the dashboard in and swap over to a distributor, wire in the distributor. But for now, I'm gonna end this video because, so I don't know when you guys are seeing this, but it's currently January 11th and I'm going back to Penn State for my 4th semester later today. So I figured I'd like to get this video out for you guys. So a lot of people are probably gonna wonder why we didn't paint this one. And the reason is, look at how good it looks the way it is. The kind of faded old John Deere decal and the B. You can't duplicate this. And this sheet metal is pretty straight too. Like, there's not many dents. All right, there's the rust there, but that's just ignore that. But you cannot duplicate that patina. And I really like that patina. That's why I put the old seat back behind the new seat back so that you could still see the old patina and the old John Deere logo. One thing I do kind of regret is painting this, the 3-point hitch. This 3-point came on the tractor. It's actually the main reason I bought the tractor. These 3-points are a little bit hard to come by now, and they're expensive if you buy one new. But it needs the arms and the pins. I have the stabilizers. You can see the arms are, all the eyes are rusted solid, and look at how much is missing there. These were sitting down in the dirt. So thanks for watching. I'll try and keep the videos coming, and I will see you guys in the next one.